The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Today on Leadership Lunch, we're going to be discussing 3 techniques you can use immediately to learn the truth from job candidates during a 30-minute interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Andrew Winnig. Just a couple of administrative things as we get started. First of all, we have a bunch of people on the call, so everyone is in mute mode. What I'd like to ask you to do now is to find a way, if you can hear my voice and see the screen, please go ahead and find a way to raise your hand. Look on your control panel. Go ahead and raise your hand. That'll let me know that the technology is all working. Great, thank you. You can put your hands back down now. And so, of course, since you're on mute, the best way to communicate with me during the call is to put the questions through on chat. So, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them through at any time. I will get to everything I can on the call, and I'm happy to stick around after the call. If there are questions coming in, I can answer questions after the 37 minutes are over. So, a couple more people logging on. As we get started, I'd like to launch the first poll. So please let me know when you're in a 30-minute interview, when you're either running them or participating in them, how productive do you feel a 30-minute interview is for you? Good. That is great. As usual, we have a large range, and of course, part of the goal today is to help you get more skills towards this. There's a good reason for that range, and it goes back to our schools. In our schools today, there's a particular word we use when we talk about teamwork. We call teamwork cheating. It's cheating. If they catch you working together on tests or problem sets or exams, you get in trouble, and they throw you out. And so it's no wonder that when we get out into the working world and we're faced with working with other people and starting to trust other people and learning how to trust other people, we're not sure what to do. People aren't sure how to interview people or how to figure out where people can fit into a team because it's something that we have not ever been taught. And so, so I can't blame you. That's what we've been taught. We're here today to talk about a better way. It's called collective engineering, and it's literally the process for developing great teams. And if you look at the chart that's up on the screen now, what happens is that we go to school and we answer individual questions. Sorry, I didn't show the poll results. Thanks for the question, Craig. Didn't show the poll results, but it was a broad range of results from the folks on the call. Thank you for the question. So we're talking about collective engineering, and when we go to school, we learn individual skills on the left-hand side. That's on the left-hand side. That's really what we learn in school. And then we get out into the business world. It's really much more about the teamwork. And so what we're going to be talking about today is a particular set of skills, namely the interview skills, that are helpful on the right-hand side of this chart. So it's helpful when you're working with people. And I must say that for myself, the focus that we've got today is that we're taking a look at the focus for today is that we're taking a look at the interview process. But as you become more of a leader and as you work more in these communication skills, learning the truth from people becomes important in a broad range of activities. Whether you're recruiting people, or whether you're talking to vendors, whether you're talking to prospects and customers, being able to get to people's truth faster and faster is a very important thing. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today: that this leadership skill of interviewing and how to get that information in this 30-minute kind of interview. And the way we're going to do that today, and the idea is that you have this very compact 30 minutes to do that. So we're going to be talking today about a couple of 3 techniques we can use to do that. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about my story, how I went from not knowing much about teamwork to knowing about teamwork to teaching about teamwork. And then we're going to talk about the 3 different techniques, how we actually do that kind of work. And then at the end, I'll wrap up with kind of talking about the questions you can't ask. And there are a bunch of questions it's actually illegal to ask when you're in an interview. And so we'll wrap up kind of, I'll set the stage for kind of what you can ask and what you can't ask, give you a very simple way of remembering kind of what's allowable and what isn't. So let's get into it. My story is that I built my first computer when I was 13 years old. Yes, I am that much of a geek. Yes, I had that little background in sales or anything other than my technical skills. I actually interviewed for my first job when I was 14 years old. And then that started me in my computer career, and I had computer jobs all through high school and college, and then finally went into the working world after college. And it was in my mid-20s that I actually started interviewing people for jobs, right? Instead of just being interviewed for jobs, I actually started hiring people and took on more of a manager's role. It wasn't until 2002 that my success started to depend directly on my ability to hire people, and that was when I became an entrepreneur. I was part of a dot-com implosion, so the company disappeared, and I actually went out, started a business called Fish Window Cleaning, and now the second business, Improv Andy, that I'm talking to you from today. And as part of that, I made a lot of bad hires. I made a lot of mistakes in the interview process. I made a lot of mistakes in training people once I'd interviewed them, and I learned along the way how to make these determinations about people, how to use the interview as a way to start managing people, and how to make the right kinds of decisions. And so today, I own 2 different businesses. I'm an active part of 5 different networking groups. I run a 200-person volunteer organization, and I have a wife and 2 children under 2 at home. And people hear that and they say, well, how many hours are in your day? It sounds like you're very busy. And I assure you that I have exactly the same number of hours as all of you. What's happened is I'm very, very efficient now about learning the truth about people, whether they're going to be working for me or I'm working with them or they're a vendor of mine. And so what we're going to be talking about today are 3 techniques that I've learned that have made me very efficient in getting people in place and delegating to them effectively so that I can get a lot more done without actually having to be there. So the next poll I'm going to put up is what can you do with a candidate's resume? So go ahead and tell me what is your process when you're working with a candidate's resume? Great, we've got some good people. I'll share the results of that quickly for everyone. So we got 100% of people on the call. That's a great unanimous vote there. That we're using it to develop their interview strategy. And of course, these poll questions are asking what you actually do, not what you feel like you should be doing. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. That the resume is actually the most untapped leadership tool out there, and that managing actually starts when you're reading the resume. So that's really where we're going to start today, and we're going to go through so this first tip we're going to talk about is how to work on the resume. And I know a lot of people in the working world who they grab the resume on the way to the interview and kind of skim it on the way in. And what you're doing is you're really leaving yourself at a disadvantage when you go talk to the candidate if you haven't looked at the resume. And so when I talk about a resume, the first thing I do before I even go to interview a candidate is I set up 3 criteria for the person that I'm looking for. And I really recommend 3 criteria being written down. And does it need to be 3? It could be 2, it could be 4. But I find that 3 is really a good standard size to have. And if you don't have these criteria in place, it makes it really, really difficult to read the resume. And so some clients I've been working with, they're in a business where they're hiring a manager. And so I'm going to give a couple of examples of resumes and how I use those resumes to drive the interview process and, in fact, the management process. And the 3 criteria we were using here was that the manager was coming in to run, kind of an operations manager to run this organization. They needed to have background in sales, they needed to have background in management, and they needed to have worked a little bit with their hands, because while they're coming in as a management job, they don't necessarily have to do the work, but we want people who kind of know how to do the work. They could pitch in and help if they needed to. And so once again, it's setting up these criteria that I think is really the key. And to the extent that people in your organization are doing interviews, it's really important to kind of share this criteria across the organization. Now, which criteria are we looking for? And that'll really help get the resume process much more solid. So let's take a look at a couple of resumes based on these criteria. We're going to go through these pretty quickly, and I'll highlight just the pieces that I'm looking at. This first one. Yeah, he looks like a pretty good candidate. He's got a bunch of sales. His background is really sales. So he's been developing new leads, sales meetings and training. He's done a bunch of training and monitoring for stuff. But if you look at this resume against the 3 criteria, you'll notice that when he talks about managing, he's really a sales manager. He's not really managing operations, and that's really, we'll talk about that in the second tip. But that's really what we're looking for. When you look for an operations manager, he needs sales and operations management. And so this guy, while he seems to have some pretty good sales background, really doesn't seem to have any management experience and doesn't really seem to have any of the hands-on experience as well. And so this resume would probably end up for me in a no pile, because he doesn't really have the 3. It doesn't look like he has the 3 pieces of it. Again, strong sales manager kind of background, but not the other two that we need. So if we look at the second resume, hang on a second. So if we look here, we've got a guy who's been a supervisor and an installer. Again, I just like to kind of poke through resumes with people. This is the type of coaching that I do, and you know, to the extent that you don't have 3 criteria that you use, or you feel a little bit at a loss when you're looking through a pile of resumes, it's definitely coaching that we offer. But I look at this. So this guy, you know, has experience driving a crew and picking up materials. He's also supervised and managed a crew of 6 to 8 people who are doing kind of work. So that's good. You know, this first job is really an office job, so I hadn't even really looked too carefully at that. But down in the bottom, he's been a delivery driver. You know, it's the kind of thing. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, so he knows how to work with his hands. He knows how to actually go out and do the work. He's got some management experience. Now, what I'll caution you is that what we're looking at here is he has supervised and managed a crew on the job site. That's the kind of thing we really want to talk to him about when we're in the interview. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we get to our second tip. But for the first tip here, what we're looking at is making sure that he has kind of this operations experience, making sure he's worked with his hands. And if we look at this guy, the sales, it doesn't look like he has so much sales, except that he's been on the job site. So he's been picking up materials, so it seems like he might have some ability to estimate those kinds of things. And again, so this doesn't make him a real top-tier candidate. It looks like he has good operational side, may not be as strong on the sales side. And of course, anytime you're working with a candidate, anytime you're looking at bringing someone on board, they're going to have a range of different skills. You're going to be making a set of trade-offs. And for this particular operations manager position, sometimes people want it to be more an operations job and less of a sales job. Sometimes you need it to be more of a sales job. And so, of course, depending on your particular perspective, you can weight them differently. But again, when I look at this resume, he looks very strong on kind of the operational, get the work done kind of side, not as strong, perhaps not as strong on the sales side. I know I'm going through this a little bit quickly, but if you have questions, feel free to put them through. And then the recording of this will be available afterwards. If you want to take a closer look at this a few hours after the webinar today, you'll get a recording in your email, so you'll have ability to go through all this. So to the third resume, I've got a guy now who's been doing, who's kind of, it's the same, you know, similar kind of delivery driver kind of stuff. He's been out on the road working in the sales territory. You know, he's actually managed a staff of drivers and technicians and that kind of stuff, and created and implemented more efficient routes, that sort of thing. So he's really got the management stuff going on. And he talks more about, and under the Budweiser stuff, the Anheuser-Busch, he has more of an established territory kind of thing. So he does have some sales background as well. And so if we look at these 3 resumes, the first resume would go kind of in my no pile. The second one goes in my maybe pile, depending on kind of what trade-offs I'm willing to make. This current one we're looking at is more the type of resume that I just pick the guy, you know, pick up the phone and call the guy and invite him in, and just, you know, and just see what happened. And as we're talking, so the tip we're really talking about here are the 3 criteria for the resume. And I think you'll see that as we talk through these resumes, now there's a specific, you know, I've been on a lot of teams where, you know, we'd look at resumes and it wasn't clear kind of what we were looking for. And I think having those 3 criteria makes it really, really clear what it is you're looking for and what you can get from people. And the thing that I find is really cool about it is that what I do is I take a cut through all the resumes and I just look for these 3 things. And anybody who's got all 3, I stick in a yes pile, and anybody who doesn't, I stick in a no pile. And then you can go back through your yes pile again and kind of pick the best people out of that yes pile. And I find that to actually be a very, very strong strategy, because some of the people who looked good the initial time through don't look as strong compared to some of the other candidates. So I really like to do this in a 2-pass kind of way. I just pull out everybody who's got the kind of experience I want, and then you can go back through and look at the actual kind of experience they have. And it's interesting for me because it's a little embarrassing for me to, you know, be on a call going through resumes, you know, actually going through reading resumes, except that I work with a lot of people who I've helped read resumes, right? You know, I've read thousands of resumes myself over the years, and I find that this strategy of kind of choosing 3 criteria and then looking at the 3 criteria in the resumes really helps. And I will say that to the extent, you know, as you move up the leadership chain, you know, as you improve your leadership skills, as you move higher up in your organizations, what you'll be looking to do is to delegate some of this, right? I mean, the work that I really work on, the collective engineering work, is teaching people how to delegate. And if you're looking to delegate the reading of resumes, which is something you definitely would want to delegate, having these criteria is a really good way of doing that. You can teach someone how to use these criteria to read the resumes and then give you the stack of resumes that you're really interested in seeing. And so when I talk about this criteria, it's also a nice way of creating that environment where you can give someone that ability to help you with it, right, to help you do this task and to set it up in a way that they can help you with it. So once again, what we're talking about now, the first tip we're talking about is 3 resume criteria. And as we talked about for this particular example, we were talking about, you know, having sales experience, management experience, and hands-on experience. I will say that first resume we looked at, the heavy sales experience. It's the kind of thing that as I'm reading resumes, I have several jobs in mind, right? As now that I run a couple of businesses, I'm always looking for salespeople and technicians and all those, all the different kinds of people. And so looking at that sales resume, I could say, well, this guy might be okay in sales, except that I know the sales criteria also for the position, and he didn't have, while he had some sales background, he didn't really have the kind of business-to-business, door-to-door selling that we would require for that. So once again, as you really clarify these 3 criteria for yourself and for your organization, it makes it really easy to have the right kinds of discussions about the candidates, right? I know I've been in rooms where people are like, well, I kind of like the guy, I kind of didn't like the guy. How do you make those trade-offs? And this first technique is one way of starting to make those trade-offs, right? You know which 3 criteria you're looking for. You can kind of make a judgment on the resume as to what those criteria are. So what I'd like to do now, I'm going to go quiet for about 30 seconds. I'd like to give you a minute to think about the hiring that you're doing, the resumes that are coming in, and just grab a piece of paper and write down the 3 criteria that you're using, right? This act of actually writing down the criteria is a very, very powerful thing. And if you feel like sharing them with me, please feel free to go ahead and type it in through the questions. But go ahead and, so what I'd like to see is I'm going to give you 30 seconds to just think about what are the 3 criteria that you're using in your organization right now as you're doing your hiring. All right, excellent. Let's continue. So to motivate our second thing, I'm going to launch another poll. So I'd like you to let me know whether you consider yourself hardworking, dependable, and a team player. Let me know whether you have all 3 of those attributes or just 2 or 1 of those attributes, but for yourself, kind of how many of those attributes do you have, hardworking, dependable, and a team player? Good. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. And now I would like to share this because this always comes up as 100% yes. And this is actually part of what we talk about when we talk about interviewing, that everyone considers themselves hardworking, dependable, and a team player. And your job as the interviewer is to decide what their definition is. And what do I mean by that? Well, every organization requires great customer service, right? They require people who really understand customer service, really are, really good at customer service. And so what usually happens, a candidate comes in and you say, okay, customer service is really important to us. Are you a good customer service person? Like, oh, yes, I am A-star, A-plus kind of customer service kind of person. You're like, great. That's exactly the kind of person we're looking for. And what's happened is really no information has been exchanged, right? That at that point, you don't know anything more about the person than you knew before, except that they claim that they have excellent customer service skills. And again, everyone believes that they have great customer service skills. And so when I look at this, when we look at hardworking and dependable, I mean, I own this window cleaning company, and work starts at 7:30 in the morning. And so there are a lot of people out in the world who are very dependable at 10 o'clock in the morning, right? They have a lot of retail jobs. They can do that kind of thing. That makes sense, right? They can be there 9:30 or 10 on a pretty consistent basis. But they cannot actually show up to our business at 7:30 in the morning. And so it's important to understand that you've got somebody who, can be very reliable if it's later on in the morning, but is not reliable early on. And from their point of view, they're a very reliable person. it's your job as an interviewer and as a leader to understand these shades of gray, right? To understand that, yes, he's a very reliable person as long as you don't make him get out of bed too early in the morning. And for myself, I mean, I'm a very dependable person if the day starts 7:30, 8 o'clock. If you need me to be somewhere by 5:30 or 5:45 in the morning, I can do it for a little while, but long term, it's really not going to be good. And on the other side, if my day doesn't start until 10 or 11, I find that to be really really tough as well. Like I like my morning to start. You know, I'm really a morning person, so I really need to start in the morning. And so once again, you know, your job is to kind of is to figure out what people's definitions are. I like to give an example too. Hardworking. I mean, I've had plenty of people who work for me who, for them, hardworking is working 3 days a week for 6 hours a day. That for them is really a stretch. And I like to tell. I mean, the hardworking story that I like to tell is back when I was in my web startup. There was a particular February we were working, and by coincidence, of course, the irony was not lost on me. This was a particular February that I had gone in on a ski house with a bunch of my buddies. And that February, it started on a Monday, and so Monday morning I went to work, and I worked Monday through Friday, that Saturday and Sunday, and the next Monday through Friday and Saturday. So that Saturday night, 2 weeks later, I drove up to the ski house. I skied Sunday, drove back down Sunday night, and then worked another 13 days straight to the next Saturday, to the following Saturday night. And so I got 2 days of skiing out of that at my ski house. But it was the hardest I had ever worked in a month, and it was, we were under a tight deadline. I wasn't concerned about it. But if you ask me about what hardworking means to me, that to me is when I was working hard. And again, I don't present that as an example of what hardworking should be or what it could be or couldn't be. I present it simply as my definition of hard. That's what I start thinking about. And it was interesting to me, being in the going from computers where I was working 60, 70-hour weeks into window cleaning where it's really a 40-hour-a-week kind of thing. It was very different for me. It was kind of a different way of thinking. And so it's important, again, to understand what are your hours like? What does hardworking look like in your environment? What does a dependable person look like in your environment? And to be able to do that. And so what's the strategy here, right? So what I've been saying so far is that your job is to get at these definitions, and how do you get at these definitions? Well, there is one question you need. There's only one question you ever need as an interviewer, and that question is, tell me about yourself. And when I tell people this, I get a lot of pushback on that because tell me about yourself has gotten a bad rap. People think it's a cop-out. People think it's not a real question. And I want to tell you why I think it's the most important question and why I think it's the most powerful question. I will say that the reason people think it's a cop-out is that most people don't take the step after it. So just asking, tell me about yourself, is not enough. I'll explain why it's a good first step. But there's actually a second question that you absolutely have to ask to make tell me about yourself be as powerful as it can be. And so tell me about yourself is a cop-out if you don't take the second step that we're going to talk about in a minute. The reason I like tell me about yourself is it does two things to the candidate right up front. The first thing it does is empower them to set the direction of the conversation. And the organizations where I work, they're all empowering organizations. They're all the kind of organization where I want people to take the lead. I want people to come in and step up and move things forward for us. And so I like to give people that opportunity. I let them set the tenor of the interview. The second thing you learn very quickly about them is how well prepared they are, because it's no real secret what you're going to ask them, right? You're going to ask them some form of tell me about yourself, tell me your strengths, tell me your weaknesses, tell me about a job you had here, tell me about a job you had there. They're all just versions of tell me about yourself. And I've worked with a lot of people who really, well, what should I talk about? I'm like, well, have you done your research on the company? Have you thought about what maybe they're interested in? So somebody who has a good answer to tell me about yourself, somebody who can say something that'll engage you and keep you moving, you already know some good things about them, right? You've already learned a lot about them. And so that's really why I like tell me about yourself. And so now let's talk about the second step. So what we're talking about here is we want to get specific with them, right? They think they're hardworking and dependable, and we need to know what their definition is of that and to compare that definition with our definition in our organization. And so the second question you ask is, can you give me a specific example of a time when you, right? So someone comes in and says, I'm a really dependable person. And you say, can you give me an example of a time when you were really dependable? And you're not really looking for anything in particular here, right? What you're looking for is to get their perspective on things. I was doing some training with some kids who had been were out of the workforce but trying to get back into the workforce. And so this one kid said, I don't have any stories about that. I said, oh, well, let's think about it. I said, what, so you want to show that you're dependable. What could you say? And he thought for a minute. He said, well, I have made the dean's list 3 semesters in a row. I said, right. I said, that's exactly the kind of story that you want to share, because that makes me think, oh, well, this kid knows how to work. He gets his homework done. He's goal-oriented because he's making the dean's list. And so telling me that you've made the dean's list 3 times in a row tells me more about you than telling me that you're dependable, right? That gives me a way of kind of hanging on to that. And I will say about the specific example side that anytime someone gives you an attribute, anytime someone says, they're great with customer service, or anytime someone says they're hardworking, or anytime someone says, they're dependable, I really encourage you to say, can you give me an example of a specific time that you gave great customer service? And I will say that what you'll usually get back is, well, a customer called and they had an issue, and so I talked them through their issue and worked out the problem and talked to my people and solved the problem. And at which point you don't really have any more information, right? So you want to say to them, okay, that's great. So can you tell me, what the specific problem was the customer was having? Well, customers have all sorts of problems, and your job as the interviewer now is to really nail them down on the specifics, because the specifics are where you are going to succeed or fail with this new candidate, right? What you want is a story of how they handled this customer issue. And what you want to do is think, as they tell you the story about how that customer issue was handled, a good exercise to go through is to be thinking, if someone were telling me this story about my organization, would that be the kind of story that I wanted to hear? Because unlike the stock market, interview candidates, the past performance is a predictor of future behavior. And people do change, but past performance is a strong predictor of future behavior in candidates. And that's part of why I believe in behavioral interviewing. I've seen it happen time and time again. And the bad hires I've made have all been bad because I didn't pay attention to some of these things that were going on, some information I could get from the interview. So once again, the strategy here that we're talking about, I call the strategy specific examples. And the particular way we do that is you say, tell me about yourself, and they start telling a story and give you an attribute or give you something that strikes your interest, and you say, can you give me a specific example? And you may have to ask for that specific example 2 or 3 times until you actually get them to tell the story, right? People are kind of trained not to tell stories. And so your job as the interviewer is to elicit this story. And you'll see that in a 30-minute interview, you have the introduction and the overview, and then you ask them questions, they ask you questions, and then you wrap up. So that's kind of the general arc of a 30-minute interview. You have time to get at 2 or 3 different stories from them, and that's really what you're looking for, to get a couple of different stories out of them that you can then think about how they match kind of the criteria that you're looking for people. He had a couple of customer service stories, and some of them were okay. One of them was great. A couple of them were fine. So that gives you some more insight into the candidate. So once again, what we're talking about here is having specific examples, getting specific examples out of people instead of general attributes, getting specific examples of work they've done as predictors of how they're going to work in your environment. And so once again, I'm going to go quiet for about 30 seconds and let you just think about how you can use this, how when you interview you can use tell me about yourself and specific examples to move that process forward. All right, excellent. So the first tip we talked about, the 3 resume criteria, that's leading into getting specific examples from them. When we interview them, we want specific examples of how they have exhibited the behaviors that they're talking about. As we get into our third example, let's put up the third poll. So where do you get most of your information from the interview? From which of the 5 phases of the interview do you feel is the most rich in information for you? Excellent. Great. Thank you for your feedback. On this one, we split down the middle, interviews questions, candidates questions. There actually is no right answer to this question. You actually get information from people at every single stage of the process. And so that's kind of why I asked the question that way, because there is information at every single stage. And what we're talking about, the third technique we're talking about is testing. And so when we talk about what you're trying to do is learn the truth about a job candidate. That's really what we're talking about here. And one truth they have is the stories that they tell. So that is one way. If you can kind of get them telling stories, and that gives you a way of kind of understanding how they come at problems, what their perspective is, how they'll handle things, what their attitude is. That is one way of doing it. The second approach is to actually give a test. And I must say that in my time as a software engineer, I gave a programming test to every single person that I ever interviewed, because most people couldn't write code. And again, I don't say that as a positive or negative thing. It's just from the position of where I was, or the kind of code I needed written by people. Everyone claimed they could write code, but if you actually put C++ in front of people and asked them to write 5, 6 lines of code, a large percentage of people couldn't actually do it. And so the testing, when we talk about testing, there doesn't need to be anything super formal about the testing. I talked about the window cleaning company that I run. We have interviews at 7:30 in the morning. That is actually a test, right? And people call up and say, 7:30, I can't get out of bed at 7:30 anymore. Can I come in at 10? And we're like, well, no, because 7:30 is when you need to show up for work. And so if you can't get there for the interview, we know you're not going to be right. We know you're not going to be right for the position. And no matter what you're doing, whether you're in the financial industry, you need people to do Excel spreadsheets, or whether you need people to be on the phone, so you make them handle some phone calls, right? Have people call them, and you could do a phone interview with someone if you need them to have phone skills, right? And you make them calculate mortgage payments, whatever it is you need them to do. Sit them down with a computer with Excel, and you need to make a spreadsheet. Have them make up a spreadsheet. It takes about 5 minutes, but it's really important to get that information before you've hired them and brought them in the door. And so I really recommend this whole testing approach. The best testing I ever did, there was a best and a worst. The worst is when you start making people just jump through hoops, and that's never good. I did make a really good hire once, but we brought him in 3 or 4 different times, run him through 3 or 4 different tests, and that was just ridiculous overkill. I mean, the guy was obviously qualified for the job. I'm not sure I'm not sure what our problem was back then. One of the best hires I made, though, was a woman who I ran her through this programming test. And the test usually took 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 on the outside. It took her almost 90 minutes to complete the test. And I'm not really sure to this day why I let it continue, except there was something about her determination. There was something about the way she was approaching the problem that made me let her keep doing it. I'd leave her alone and go off and do my work and come back and see how she was doing. And every time she had more questions, she was working a little bit towards the solution. In the end, after 90 minutes, she had a solution and understanding of the problem that was better than me or anyone I had ever interviewed. And so I hired her, and then spent 4 months sweating it out as I was trying to get her up to speed. Again, my developers usually come up to speed in about 2 weeks. It took her 4 months to get up to speed. But once she was up to speed, there was no one better than her, right? And this to me is really the example that ties it all together, that when you're doing your interviewing, when you're going step by step through your interviewing, you're getting information that will help you with the management. And that was really the case here, that my boss was on me, like, what's going on with this person? I said, you know what? I said, she's a little bit slow to learn. I said, but once she gets it, there'll be nobody better. And it was true. Like once she caught on, there was nobody better in the organization. And so once again, testing. A lot of people have tests that make people feel bad or not. I'm a true believer in just tests that are job function related, right? You need someone to create a spreadsheet, have them create a spreadsheet. You need someone to show up at work at 8 in the morning, they can show up at work at 8 in the morning. Whatever it is, there's no big deal about it. It just helps you weed out. You need someone who's computer literate, make them go through an online application process, right? Those kinds of things. And so I think it's really important to put those kinds of things into your interview process, because people can talk about a lot of things, and what you're looking to figure out is what they can actually do, right? That's what we're looking at as we work on this part. And so the third technique we're talking about is testing. And I'd like to give you about 30 seconds now to just think about what sort of candidates you're hiring, what sort of skills you're looking for, and what sort of simple tests you could put together that would help you with your interview process. So I'll give you 30 seconds to think about what sort of tests you could put in place. All right, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to run a couple of minutes late, and I apologize for that, but it won't be more than 2 or 3 minutes late. So what I'd like to do now, I'm going to put up the final poll for you. So of the three strategies we talked about today, the 3 resume criteria, the specific examples, and testing, which one do you think is most valuable to you as in kind of the work that you're doing now, as where you are in your hiring process and business growth process? Excellent. Thank you as always for your feedback, and I will remind you that once this webinar is over, you will see a survey come up, and these webinars are for you. They're to provide value for you as you go through your day and become more effective. And so please feel free to fill out our survey and submit that for us, because we are always interested in hearing what you have to say. So I want to tie this back quickly. We talked about collective engineering is the process behind all of this, and what we were talking about is, we start off in our schools doing all the work ourselves. When we get into a management or leadership position, we start needing to hire people to delegate to them, and these skills put us over on the right-hand side of this chart. And the skills we've been talking about today are really in the delegate manage. If you look at it, they're in the delegate manage side. You learn these interview techniques. It can be difficult to understand. I hear a lot of people who are kind of new at interviewing thinking, how bad could it be? I'm just hiring someone. How bad could it be? And sometimes you need that experience. I had a guy stealing from me the second day I had him on board, and I actually hired him against a reference's recommendation. So that's a mistake I'll never make again. But it just takes time to go through these and to understand kind of what the risks are. And part of our job as leaders is to help our teams understand that and help them get better at doing the interviewing and helping them with these skills. And of course, if you want help with these skills in your organizations, we offer that. Improv offers that as webinars or live presentations. So feel free to contact us for any of that. So what I want to do now is just give a quick overview of illegal questions. And if you have any other questions you want to submit, again, I can take more time to answer questions if you want to stay on the call. If you want to contact me afterwards or put them on the survey, that's fine too, obviously. So when we talk about illegal questions, it's actually very simple to figure out whether a question is illegal or not. And the easy way to figure it out is that all legal questions, all questions that you are allowed to ask, are directly related to job performance. So anything you're asking someone about the job they're going to need to perform is perfectly legal. Anything outside of that is not. And the example I like to give is that you're not allowed to ask someone whether they're married or whether they have kids or any of those sorts of things. And the reason, of course, is that it's discrimination, right? If someone has kids, maybe they won't be able to show up. The way you do phrase the question is you say to them, you know what, this job requires work every other Saturday. Is that something you can fit into your schedule, right? And then it's up to them to worry about babysitters or coverage from their spouse or whatever it is they need to do to show up for work. But you're staying very clear on the job function. And so you're allowed to ask anything that relates to job function. We have weekend requirements. Our work starts at 6 in the morning. Whatever it is, you can ask about things related to job requirements. What I suggest to people is to avoid personal small talk during interviews, and especially for people who are just starting out on interviews. It's an easy kind of thing to fall into, right? You just kind of start talking, and suddenly you get yourself into kind of hot water with the conversations that you're having. So what I like to do is prepare people who are doing interviews, the interviewers, with some small talk you can talk about the business. So when the candidate says, how are things going, you can say things like, oh, it's a great time in the business. We're growing. We're looking for this help. You can kind of keep the conversation business related and set that for them. And so once again, the illegal side of questions is you're not allowed to ask them any personal questions. And if they bring up personal stuff, I'd like to just kind of move the conversation along, because again, nothing good can come from me hearing any of that. What you really want to do is keep it to the job function and the job-related performances, and that's part of why I like testing as well, because when you're testing people, it's very clearly job-related, and you don't kind of go off reservation. So that is a little bit of talk about the illegal questions, right? Once again, you're allowed to ask anything you can about job-related functionality, and so you just want to make sure that you're focusing on requirements of the job, and you're focusing on them in a way that's kind of not related to their personal life. You're just talking about job functions. And so with that, I will put up the question screen, again, we ran over by a few minutes, and I apologize for that. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to stay on the call for a couple more minutes and answer any questions that come up. So I'll give you a couple minutes if you want to put a question in. Go ahead and do so. Oh, good question. Thank you. Someone put in a question saying, you mentioned all the different phases of the interview, and you said you could get information at every single phase of the interview. You know, what did you mean by that? And thank you. That's a great question. Appreciate you putting that through. You get information from a candidate every time you interact with them. You know, from how they treat the people at the front desk to how on time they are. Right? I mean, it's this funny kind of leadership thing that what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. Right, and I work with people all the time who are like, you know, I want to show them that I'm really on time, and I'm like, that's easy, just be on time, right? And so when you're going through the process, there are all sorts of information that you have, and in fact, one technique we use in the window cleaning business is we ask people to give us a call. You know, we say, you know what, we're busy, we're going to look at your candidacy, you know, please give us a call back in a couple of days, you know, by Friday or by Monday, to find out where we are, and if they don't call us back, we don't follow up with them. You know, we're looking for people who are a little bit motivated. The work requires being a little motivated to go out and do the work. And if they're not motivated to remember that they're supposed to call us, they're probably not such a good candidate. And so they don't know, right? They don't really know that they're being tested, but it does give us that kind of testing. And so that's really what I mean, that you're getting information at every stage along the interview. What your job as an interviewer is really to kind of take in everything they've done. You know, if you find somebody is tough to schedule with, right? You know, they set up a schedule and they change. You know, they call you and tell you they can't come and change the schedule a couple of times. You know exactly what setting up meetings with them is going to be like. You know exactly what it's going to be like to interact with them. And again, this is not a good or a bad thing. It just is, right? I mean, they could have the skills and just know going into managing them that they're going to be a little bit tough to pin down for a time to get together. So it's just really about being aware of those kinds of issues as you're going through this process. That's really and just being open to the information that's coming in. That's what really makes you a good leader and a good interviewer. Great question. Any other questions out there? Another good question about illegal questions, asking. So, you know, if you can't talk about personal stuff, how do you connect with someone? How do you create that rapport? And you know, you can ask about vacations. You can ask. You know, you just want to be careful not to ask the question. You know, who did you go with, right? Because that's where you get into the illegal side. And so you can make that kind of connection. But I really do encourage people, and what I train people on and do workshops on is how to create that rapport without the kind of personal small talk, right? That's what most people know, but you can do the same in a business environment. There's an easy way to kind of get business small talk going, and you know, there's some simple techniques for doing that. So if you want more information on that, I just encourage you to get in touch with me, and we can talk about that in more depth. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone, for being on the call. It's been a pleasure working with you. I look forward to seeing you next month. Check your email for next month's scheduled webinar. And again, please feel free to fill out the survey on the end. We want to make sure we're giving you what's useful to you and what you need. So please fill out the survey. Let us know how we're doing. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much, everyone. Talk to you later.